podcast where we establish convening power in the built environment. In this season, we are convening conversations around the topic of careers. Today, we have with us Jacki Schaefer, who is an architecture career specialist who helps students and professionals navigate their career journey. Welcome, Jacki.
Hi, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
We're also here with Alex and Minku, if you both want to say hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Jacki, so we first met when you were teaching a seminar at Rice as an alumni. I guess to settle our listeners to where you began, what first attracted you to architecture?
I think it's a story you've probably heard from other people, which is I was a young child and I thought, oh, I want to draw houses. I want to like represent houses and come up with buildings. And I thought it was this magical thing. And I just sort of like, and at around age 6 or 7 had said that, and then became addicted to the reaction that I got from the adults in my life who were very impressed by that. It's, oh, that's a great career and that's a thing you should do. And absolutely. And just never thought about it again, quite frankly, until I was years into my architecture career.
So you're no longer an architect. I guess when did you know that being a pure architect wasn't the path for you? And can you tell us a little bit about what drove that decision?
Yeah, I graduated in 2009 with my like sort of terminal with my BArch. And I think I was working and I had done a lot of different projects, a lot of different typologies, and worked for a lot of different people in one firm. And I wasn't really happy. And the time that I had graduated, the recession was still kind of affecting the way that buildings were happening. And so we would get these new projects and they would go on hold. And it's like we didn't have built work forever. And it just was so dissatisfying to like work on these SD packages over and over and over again and never see anything come out of it. And so I eventually, within the firm, transitioned into marketing. I was like, maybe that'll fix it. Well, like writing proposals does not fix it. At least it didn't fix it for me. I'll tell you that much. Thought maybe like part-time, maybe it's just like, the hours. And I'm fortunate that I was married at the time to somebody who could support that. So many people can't, but I thought maybe like that's the way. And like none of it really worked. And I had a great supportive boss who's still a good friend of mine. And it's just like, if it's not working here for me, it's not going to work anywhere. And so I quit and I didn't try it anywhere else, which I deeply regret.
But you sort of talk about how at the beginning you had an impression of architecture, especially when you were a kid, and that was maybe reinforced by the adults in the room who are saying, yes, that's what an architect does. That's valuable. That's important. And then I'm sure like a lot of us, you went into school and you discovered architecture in a different way, but then probably went into practice and then discovered that it was actually not even the same as any of those two other expectations. Is there anything, we can go on and on about the kind of disjunct between, I guess, practice and academia, but was there anything in particular that you felt was maybe wasn't living up to your expectations when you actually got into the field?
What's funny is I don't think academia lived up to my expectations either. Like, I think I felt like I was a fish out of water and like I didn't understand the language that everybody else seemed to understand. And just kind of, I never really felt like I got it. And I thought certainly like it's, the internships I had, I was thriving. I was having such a great time. And so I thought for sure, like leaving school, like this is where the normal people are. And this is like where I'm going to like find my place with my people. And it was a really good time when the people that I was working with, I had a great time. And then they started getting laid off and people started leaving. And my firm, which was 125 people, kept getting smaller and smaller. And it felt lonely. And I think all the good things that had masked the experience were gone. And, I was growing up, quite frankly, and became married and started thinking about a family. And suddenly the bowling league and the happy hours and all these things that we did together were kind of less of a priority. And there were fewer people doing them. And I think that all of the parts of architecture that I had sort of ignored for all of those years became the only parts that were left. And I was deeply unhappy. I'd go home and cry every night and just be unhappy. And I couldn't tell you why. It just didn't feel right.
Did you feel like you're the only one going through this at the time, or was it isolating?
I think I was by that point, all of my contemporaries had been laid off and were working elsewhere. And I think, or they were kind of head down, or they felt like they were in the right place, which many of them still are very happy and in the right place. And so I think that it was it was just a very lonely place to be. And my spouse is not an architect, and thought the whole thing was insane. I mean, that was really the breaking point, if I can be completely honest with you. So my husband worked in oil and gas and technology and came home with an annual bonus that was bigger than my entire salary in architecture. And I just thought, what am I doing? Like, I am absolutely miserable for why? Like what was I getting out of it?
Just for the context, can you give us like the year of when that happened?
So that would have been 2012 when I left architecture. And I like the program at Rice, because I'm also an alum of Rice. You do sort of the 4 traditional years of the BA, and then you go away and you work for a year. And I was a low income student. My parents could not support me the way that many could. So I had to work pretty consistently from about my junior year onward in different jobs. And so I had worked for my company starting my senior year through this preceptorship year that was, a year long, and then through my final year as well. So I started working for them around about 2007. So it was about 5 years at that company.
Yeah,
Was a career coach before your time when you were a student that was very helpful?
No, there was no one. There was no one. And so I invented this position at our school. I said, this is something that we need. I spent a lot of time after classes talking to students who approached me and said, hey, I need your help. Can you look at this? Can you tell me something? I would talk about what it was like working before class. And so it was like in the first 10 minutes, if you got to class on time, you would hear me, talk about something, or stay after, and we would talk about your resumes or portfolios. And so to me, it seemed like there was this great need for it. And I advocated for that role. And we made it happen briefly, about 5 years.
So it seems like you had a very natural progression into this career coaching role. Having your experience, I guess, what to you is the identifying moment when someone should seek out a career coach? And can you tell us a little bit about what you think sets a great coach apart from just an average one?
Yeah, I think that there's always sort of a question of whether it's a process that needs to be formalized. I think as someone who is now a career coach for my job, I'm going to say, of course, yeah, formalize it, do it. The thing that I think is valuable about finding a career coach is you're going to exhaust your network. You're going to exhaust your coworkers or your trusted friends who are going to give you their opinions on what you should do with your life. And you may even return to educators who give you their opinions on what you should do with your life. Or your parents. Parents always have a lot of opinions. And I think that what a coach will provide is sort of a more ethical framework for the direction that they give you. And so it's a little bit less biased. It's a little bit, I mean, even now I have to stop myself. If somebody tells me that they want to work somewhere that I know is a place I would never work, and you have to be okay with the fact that like, that's probably the right choice for that person. Or if that's where their instinct is driving them, like, let's talk about why and support that. It's not about my own story or my own lived experience. And so I think when you feel like maybe you need somebody who understands that process, but maybe that you don't need them to bring their baggage into the car with you, maybe that's the place. But I think the ethical part of it's extremely important, and not something that we talk about much, which is where is the advice coming from, or where is the guidance coming from, and why does it sound or look the way that it does?
Can you, I guess, expand a little bit on the ethics part of what you're talking about? I guess, like, where does that vein of thinking come from, and can you maybe give us a few examples?
Yeah, I started to see it myself just working with students, that I was putting a lot of my own experience on students and going, well, you don't want to work at these places. Those are 60-hour weeks. You're going to be paid like trash. And, or, like, take this job, like, yeah, it's less glamorous, but it's going to pay you all this money or whatever it is. Or even just not understanding fundamentally like the functional difference of somebody who needs H-1B sponsorship, and like what sort of trade-offs there are for doing something like that, because it's not the same math problem for everyone, and the factors vary so widely that you can't just give broad advice. You have to really sit down and understand a larger network of issues in order to be able to give somebody sound advice, or to even, it's not always advice either, just asking the right questions. So I went through a program to get accredited by the International Coaching Federation, which teaches you a lot about how to coach in a very specific way. And something that's very important is that you're not the driver. You're the person sitting there with a map saying, well, you could go over here. There's mountains over here. There's a river over here. What feels right to you? It's not about saying, hey, I think you should do this. This is the path I drove on. It was great.
It seems like coaching is a lot of, well, at least figuring out your career. And I'm sure this is a lot of what you do, Jackie, with any of your clients, is asking the question, why do you want to do something? And it's so interesting because I've had this moment a lot of times where I think I'm supposed to do something, but I don't know actually why. And it's not until somebody asks me why that I even think about it. I'm curious if you find that there's a particular reason we as individuals, as people trying to find a job, act like that, or if it's also specific to architecture too. I feel like in architecture and design, there's a lot of dogma, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of tradition, some of which is good, but there's a lot of expectation that maybe as we sort of feel like we just get thrust into the academic setting, we get put into school, we don't exactly know why that's the case. And then once we're out of that position, we don't know exactly why we should take the next step.
Well, I think like one thing about coaching and about having these conversations is it's the luxury of having someone listen to you for an hour, 45 minutes, and ask you questions and make you unpack it. It's very rare that you can talk to somebody for an hour and have them keep the focus on you and not try to relate. It's very human to want to relate to people and to not say, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Do you? If my student says, I want to feel fulfilled in my career, well, I know what fulfillment means to me. But the second that I ask them to define what that looks like, I'm going to learn a lot more, and I'm going to be in a much better place to sort of understand them if I can understand what it is that they care about. I think we make a lot of assumptions, right? And so maybe like that's part of it. I think part of it is just you have to understand fundamentally within yourself that like you're never going to take yourself that deeply down the road. Like you'll sort of say, why am I doing this? Well, I don't know, because I have to, because I have bills to pay, and because we're not encouraged to be vulnerable in this way, and we're not encouraged to really think and push beyond those limits. It's to sort of give the quick answer. Within architecture, I think I do think it's sort of universal because I talk to people in all sorts of careers now, and they have the same types of problems in terms of sort of understanding what their interior motivations are. But architecture is unique in the way that it sort of pushes very hard, academia specifically pushes very hard for sort of one type of success and one sort of definition of what is valuable work or important work, or what is important, like accolades. What are valuable sort of wins for us? What are valuable definitions of success? It's very narrow. The types of firms and work that we hold up as exemplary and important, it's very narrow. And it's funny because people will say, oh, it's super, super wide. It's really not when you get out into the rest of the world.
Do you feel like though that's changing a little bit? I feel like there's re-emphasis on maybe things that have more social engagement, that have value outside of just traditional architecture prestige.
Yeah, I think I've seen like recently there's been more of a drive to do socially impactful work. I don't know that the work has caught up yet. Like I've always felt like a lot of the socially impactful work, or the messaging around it, the messaging around the research event, is super performative still. And this is just sort of my pessimism that it's great to say this is for everyone or whatever, but I think that we do it in sort of a very surface way, because those conversations, we have them in studio, or something, and it's 4 months of like, hey, solve this massive social issue with architecture. Architecture can do it. Architecture is the vehicle for progress. It's like, where's the rest of the context? And where's the rest of the discussion with anyone else who's doing things in other vehicles? Those conversations aren't really meaningfully there in the same way. It's very performative, and I mean, like, respect, like that's how progress happens, right? It has to start somewhere. So I don't mean to be so pessimistic about it, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's getting better.
Yeah, I remember when I was in graduate school, one of the option studios, basically the prompt was to solve climate change. And a noble cause, but no one took the studio because it just wasn't defined enough, you know? I mean, it's not something anyone disagree with, but it's hard to agree with like a studio that looks at that too. So I do think that part of it is trying to figure out, maybe we understand the direction we're going, but what steps are we now taking in order to actually get forward in that direction in terms of making a difference? Perhaps maybe we can talk a little bit too about what you feel. You work closely with students in the past, and how you feel that students' opinion or kind of expectations are formed while they're in school. I think Rice is an interesting example because part of the curriculum is actually going outside and being influenced by other firms, by the preceptorship programs particularly. And do you feel like students are being, I guess, well, I mean, part of being in school is trying to figure that out in a way. But how do you think that the understanding of the job of architect is influenced by the academy to some extent?
Oh man. I mean, I think that it's sort of the same answer, right? Which is that there's a correct version of work and there's sort of a lesser version of work that's presented. And it takes into account none of the variables that shape the lives of the individual. I think it's very easy to say, oh, take this opportunity at this architect office. If you have the ability to be supported while you're doing that, it's a completely different situation when you have to eat and you have to make the money to eat. You know, we still don't address these things. And there are a million conversations around diversity and progress. But you know, the answer to any visa oriented issues are usually like, you need to go talk to your international student office. You need to go figure it out elsewhere. We can't give you legal visa advice. We can't help you in this way. They can help you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that like it's still very much a funnel into a specific type of career. And there's a sort of justification, or at least it feels like there's a justification with the advice that we give, or that we see given, I guess I should say, that is, you know, this is kind of how it worked for me, and it was a really valuable experience, and this is what I suggest you do. And it's the same story over and over again, right? It's go to grad school and work at these places and earn your keep, and you know, do the research and know the most important people and hang out in these particular spaces, work in these specific cities, and have success in this specific way like I did, and you'll be happy.
No, I was just going to say, like, for me, we often look, because sometimes, not, like you're saying, there's no one there to tell us what to do necessarily. And so we look at our role models, who are primarily the people who are teaching us, to see what they did. But I mean, everything changes, you know, by generation. If I look at the career path of some of my professors, there's no way I could do the exact same thing, simply because, for instance, the projects that they were working on, they don't exist anymore. They're not available because they've already been built, let's say, you know. So I think there's a realization that some of us have, which is we can model a sort of a trajectory across against a role model's career, but we can't necessarily model every step of the way. We can't copy each step.
But it also really like surprises me that the shoe never drops. You know, if I talk about the fact that I walked away from architecture, one of the first things I admit is the sheer privilege of being able to walk away from a career with no secondary plan, to be able to adjunct or to do a part-time career counseling job, and to live that life because I have socioeconomic support in my relationship. There's never any discussion of, you know, it's easy to get this work if it's your friends, parents who are hiring you, or this is a great opportunity. This was an amazing opportunity for me because I was fully supported while it was happening. Or that I mean, you know, a white man who had a presentation that went really well and people were comfortable with that person driving the project. None of these other sort of factors ever come up in this discussion. It's this consistent narrative of, if you work hard enough and if you sacrifice enough, it will come. And it leaves a lot of people sort of outside going, well, why hasn't it come yet? Like, what more do I have to do?
I guess as someone who, you know, seems very much focused on the individual in your coaching and speaks to a lot of students, like, what are some, I guess, trends and ideas that you see coming, I guess, as a theme that you detect in this new generation of architects?
It changes every year, and I think it's definitely highly influenced by the collective studio experience that they've had. And so you'll see, like, for instance, things go hot and cold very quickly. When I was in school, I think I must have designed 5 or 6 museum projects, and never wanted to look at another museum from an architectural perspective ever again. I've definitely had students come out and say no more affordable housing, no more mixed use projects, and so there's like sort of a rejection of something that's been explored in a lot of ways. I've seen an increase for sure over the last 15 years, an increased interest in residential architecture. Something about sort of like materiality and the scale and the personal sort of nature of that work that has been valuable. I think, social things that have a social implication in some way. And so civic projects or community-oriented projects, there's definitely been an increase in interest in urban planning. And I've always sort of personally positioned urban planning as one of the more democratic versions of design. Streets are for everyone, and everyone has to use them, and we all have to figure out how to use them together. And so if you care a lot about people and you care a lot about how people interact, there's a place maybe that's valuable there. And so we see a lot of that. And then there is functionally a new crew in the last, I would say, like 4 to 5 years that are very aware of the disconnect between academia and practice. And they're very aware of the monetary issues that surround architecture practice. And they're very aware that it's, the game has to change in some meaningful way. And so they come out going, what else can I do with this? I mean, from the get-go, like immediately. And then those things cycle in trends too. I had, a class like 5 or 6, over the course of 3 years who wanted to go into UX UI design. And for a while it was programming, coding. I want to be a full stack developer, real estate. I want to, work as an owner rep. Like there have been different things at different times. And I think a lot of it is sort of connecting with one story that they've heard or one reality. I've heard that, UX UI designers can make like $150,000 the first year out of school. That's what I'm going to do. And it's funny because I hear those stories, and my first question is like, what else though? Like, because, and I say this all the time for them, which is like the money might be there, but the money's never going to be enough. It's never going to feel like enough. It's never going to, it's never going to feel like enough. You're making probably, any of you making more money than you did when you started, I would certainly imagine. And it's never enough, right? It's your life grows. And as you grow and you have children or you get dogs or you buy a car or whatever, your life grows. And so there has to be something driving behind the money. There has to be something, because it will not sustain you in any way but the most superficial. You have to stay curious, and you have to have something that engages you from an intellectual perspective deeply. And that doesn't last forever. Those are fleeting moments.
Right. I have a question. So if you had someone like you when you were at school, what would be your, what would you talk about? Like, what would you want to talk about with a career, on the career, and, what would be a helpful advice for you at the time?
I think it's important to understand what you're getting out of these jobs. I think that like understanding that this is not a relationship where you come in debt to these people for their opportunity. I mean, you do. I mean, sure. Yeah. It's wonderful that someone's hired you and that they've taken a chance on you, but you've also proven more than most graduates from most programs. You've proven that your work is valuable. You have this physical evidence of it, and there's power in that. They know what they're getting in a lot of ways, and you have more power than you know. But also just that this is just a temporary thing that gives you something. This is a building block for you. Is it that you're getting H-1B sponsorship? Is it that you're getting the hours that you need for licensure? Is it that you're moving to the city that you want to be in that's near your family or somewhere that you wanted to live before? What is it that you're getting out of this? Is it that I want to try this project typology for the first time and see if it's the right one? And instead of putting so much pressure on the front end, figure it out and have all those answers, to just understand how this fits into sort of a larger lifelong process. because I don't think any of us would say that we're in the thing that we want to do forever. I don't think that's a thing anymore.
Well, in that regard, I mean, you're sort of saying that, okay, the first job is not going to be the last job. Although I think students tend to think that that's the case. You know, my very first summer internship is going to be, I'm going to make partner eventually. No, that doesn't usually happen. But that being said, when you advise people, how far ahead do you advise them to think about? Like, is it a series of steps? Is it a certain path? Really, or is it more of a kind of direction, a goal, an aim?
I think it's about making the decision for this. It's very focused on this step. What is this job? What is this opportunity that you're looking for? And how does that fit into the story of where you've been? Because these are all things you know, right? So for my students who are looking for an internship, I'm saying, look at your resume and your portfolio and tell me where the holes are. Like, what are the missing skills? What are the missing experiences that you want to try before you get out there? And let's go find opportunities that align with that. When it's, you know, their first job out of school, it's really just that job. It's where are you trying to be geographically sometimes, or what are you trying to be doing from a typological perspective, or what firm size? Like, they come in with different sort of requirements. And so for me, it's important that like we understand what those parameters are for them and come up with what a good response is for that for this time. My expectation is not that we're looking that much farther down the road. It used to be like, let's come up with a plan. And I don't see the value in it anymore. There are too many factors. There are too many things that change, and everything that you think is so certain in life, you know, it doesn't take long for you to realize that those plans are kind of a waste of time. Because everything changes in ways you can never expect, and opportunities will come to you, or you'll find out that you know, suddenly love spec writing, and you go into it and it's not something you ever would have thought that you were into. And so you have to be open to those possibilities. And I think you do that by understanding where you are at present and trying to stay mindful and sort of say, this is what this means for me now. And you're a boat floating on the ocean, you know what I mean? And it's going to rise and fall, and it's okay, you know?
I think it's interesting I hear a lot of students also talk about their dream job, where they want to be. But then when you consider it from the employer standpoint, to be quite frank, I doubt that many employers really care about those things. You know, they just need someone to do the work. And I think, I mean, I'm sure you have some insight too, some understanding of how that sort of process goes into actually finding people to do a job, especially within architecture, which can be very time consuming, have a lot of liability. So you need to hire someone who's trustworthy, who can actually get the work done. Do you find that there's an issue there as well, potentially?
I think like the biggest issue right now, from at least in my position from the employer side, is the expectation now is that students are coming out of school with all of these competencies that you should be training them for, right? And I think that if you were okay with investing in teaching them Revit, or teaching them how to do renders the way that you want them done, or teaching them how to do the drawing sets, I mean, that takes time. But then all you have to do is focus on, is this person someone that I want to work with, someone that I can put trust into, and someone I can develop. And I think the entire relationship would shift. But it's rare for me to see that. It's rare for me to see anybody offering training anymore. They want the resume that says, I can drive the Revit machine. Or did you do this render in this portfolio? Is this yours? How did you do this? Can you do it? Can you do ones just like this for us? You know, it's very transactional, and it devalues the student. And it really cheapens the entire process, because it's, yeah, sure, you're on a project and you need somebody who can do Revit and pick up your red lines. Yeah. But, you know, I taught Revit for years. It takes 24 hours. That's 3 8-hour days to teach somebody that program. It's hard. And apologies to any Revit instructors anywhere. It's very valuable work. Don't get me wrong. But I think that like we're focusing on entirely the wrong things. And what we should be talking about is, how do you think? How do you solve problems? What do you care about? What drives you? How are you going to fit in with these team members? And whether or not the environment that you're in is going to be a good fit for the personality that you have, which is sort of the biggest mystery of all of it. And that's the question I get asked the most, which is, what's the culture like at this firm? And it's like, well, I can tell you what the culture would be like for me, but that's not particularly relevant for you.
Yeah, it does seem that there's always an anxiety amongst anybody who's finding a job between kind of their cultural fit, their personality, their intellect, as well as the technical requirements that they need to perform the job, especially in architecture, because there can be some quite demanding kind of languages, whether it be software or code or just a certain kind of design approach that you need to understand in order to fit a certain role potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot for a student to try to synthesize, and so they don't. They just sort of say, "I like this work, and I'm going to send my stuff out and hope that it aligns." And I think that's all you can do in a lot of ways. Like you can do all the research in the world that you want, but you have no idea how you're going to act once you're out there. And I see it all the time. I see 2 years out, students come back and say, "Yeah, I'm ready to move on." And sometimes it's because they've learned all they need to learn from that place, and sometimes it's because they guessed wrong. And like, of course, you're going to guess wrong. Like there are too many factors. But I also think there's a whole part of this that we never really talk about that fascinates me, and that's, physiologically, like what's going on. You're leaving. For a lot of students, college is a soft launch into adulthood, and when you leave, you're hard launched, right? And now suddenly, like all of these things that the health insurance and all of these different things kind of come into play. Making sure that your bills are paid. Maybe you did, or maybe you didn't have that experience in college. Maybe it was taken care of for you. And so I think that, there's all this sort of exterior stuff that's going on, and you see like a mental health dip when people leave. They've been in this, environment that, for better or worse is a very demanding and challenging environment, but you're surrounded by your peers who are experiencing the same things as you. I mean, I've had students call me who have moved to New York and said, I'm more lonely and depressed than I've ever been in my life. And it's so isolating because suddenly you're the only one. For a lot of these firms, you're the only new hire they've had in 2 years, and you're just by yourself in a way that I think no one's prepared them for.
Yeah, so I feel like a theme that emerges is that there's this wide gap between academia, kind of the professional practice, and then the expectation of students. And I think as someone like you who works at the intersection of all three, if you had a magic wand and you can wave it and make something happen that starts bridging this gap, like what would that be?
I think that opportunities like, Cincinnati's got their co-op program, and Rice has the preceptorship, I think are super valuable experiences. Even, if I have a student who's at year 4 and they're thinking they're going to quit, my advice to them typically is go through preceptorship and see how you feel about it, because it's going to feel very different. And so I think that work experience is extremely valuable. And I think that understanding that, maybe there's not a fix for it, but maybe that architecture, the education, is sort of a separate gift from whatever you choose to do with it afterward. I don't regret my architecture education at all. It informs everything I do, from the way that I parent and the way that I exist as a human in society to the way I load my dishwasher and fight with my husband about it. I mean, it's impacted every single aspect of my life. And I think that it makes you a better person to be critical of yourself and to learn how to anticipate sort of what the criticisms might be. It keeps you on your toes. It gives you massive amounts of baggage, and it makes you question your own confidence and a lot of other things that you have to heal over time. But I think that it's a better position to be in than to go out in the world and never question the quality of the work that you do or why you're doing it.
Yeah, that's pretty profound. I think that, Lebo and I went through the preceptorship program, and it drastically changes the way that you think about yourself, first of all, rather than just the world, the architecture profession. I do also agree that I think their experience is invaluable. You can't take it away. And I think some people may feel like, oh, well, my experience needs to be perfect. It needs to be excellent. But some of my best experiences, at least the ones I've learned about most from, are the bad ones, actually. And I think that willingness to go out and kind of fall flat in your face sometimes, or get completely destroyed by your boss, that actually inform, well, okay, maybe that's how someone does it, but I also don't want it to work like that, or I want to do something different. I think anti-precedents are also very helpful.
I agree that the mistakes you make are always more instructional than the great wonderful times, because you don't think about those, right? You just like accept it for what it is and think that's how it should always be and never question why it's not that way. And I think too that like the interdisciplinary part is really valuable, right? So you get out into the workplace and suddenly you're working with people who don't think like architects, and that's great. You don't need everybody to think like architects. You need people to think like plumbers and structural engineers and contractors. Like it's necessary. And I wish that we did more of that type of work. One of the most valuable experiences I had as an undergrad was we were paired with students who were going through our MBA program, and I set to design a mixed use project. And these guys, and I'm still friends with them, they're great people. They came back and they said, this is way over budget. We're going to need you guys to cut like half the glass. And we're like, you can't cut half the glass in a residential building. Those are windows. That's how people see outside. And shocked that anybody would make such a ridiculous, request. Come on, why are you going to cut all the windows out of the building? And it's like, because they're seeing the building in a spreadsheet. I never had thought about that before.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, oh, like the budget is what it is, it costs what it costs, and you adjust it. If you ever even talked about budget, you get through almost all of architecture school and never talk about budget. But seeing it through somebody who did not prioritize design, who prioritized, all of the other stuff, it's like, man, okay, there's more to this, than what we see. And I think that that's super valuable too. But I also don't know how that fits in the existing pedagogy and how you make that valuable and meaningful in what it feels like forever, especially when you're in architecture school. 5 or 6 years is crazy for an undergrad degree, but it's like it's such a wonderful thing to have those experiences. And we see them in the RICE program at the tail end, right? We'll get studios where we start to think about the mechanical stuff and trying to figure out how it all goes together, but it's never enough. And then you sort of face plant into reality once you start working.
Yeah, and I would say too that we've had some of those kind of awakening moments where you think you think your work is amazing, and then you show it to someone who is not an architect, doesn't get it at all, it doesn't buy it. I agree. I think that we should have more of those experiences earlier on. And maybe one of the issues too with the way that things are set up is once you graduate, you kind of continue to do a similar role to what you did in school in a firm. You continue to make drawings, you make diagrams, and it's not until you're really a little bit higher and have a bit more experience that you have a little bit more client facing or consultant facing experience. So I think you're bringing up a really interesting point, which is basically try to expose yourself to as many voices and perspectives as possible, at least with regards to your work. I think that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, one of the best things I did was try to work for every project manager we had at my firm, every project typology. They all manage their projects so differently. The processes were so incredibly diverse just within our own firm, and maybe that's a problem for someone. I don't know. It was a great learning experience for me to understand what it's like to work for a team that are expected to work every weekend, and what it's like to have a team where you're barely working 40 hours a week. And all of the things that come with that, I think were valuable that early. And I wish there were more opportunities. I know SOM does sort of their year one, which is supposed to be this more broad exposure. And I think that it would be great if there was something more like that was more broad, right? Architecture used to be an apprenticeship-based profession, and all of it was about learning. And now there's more of an expectation or an onus on the front end to learn all the stuff and then to regurgitate that in the professional world. And there's an ever decreasing interest in training and teaching and sit with me for 3 hours while I redline this and I explain to you why. And there's an expectation for students to go and ask, but I don't think that they know to even ask the questions, say, why is this way? And you have to have the right PM or PA who's going to say, yes, I'll sit down and explain these things to you, because a lot of them go, get out of here, kid.
The one who's not overworked as it is, yeah.
Right, because it trickles up, so it's kind of, it's a difficult situation. I learned the most from the people who were willing to sit with me and explain it, obviously, but not everybody has the bandwidth to do that.
So I guess in your experience and, having tracked probably more than a handful of students through their early careers, like I guess what are some firms that are doing it right in your opinion?
Oh gosh. Um, you know what's funny is I don't think that there's anybody out there doing like particularly profound work on like a large scale that's really noticeable. Because too, like how do you define what that is? But I think that there are some incredible sort of small business owners who are doing it right, who understand. I think that there are people who understand fundamentally that architecture is a part of your life. And that's what's valuable to me at this point anyway. And I think I'm like, my bias is coming into it too, which is like, what's somebody doing right? Well, they're understanding that this is a part of your life and that you become a better architect by being in society and not by sitting in your office all day long. As far as the firms that are doing it right, I think that these are questions that, like we tell students to ask, or that I tell students to ask at this point, which are, what does success look like, right? For me, if I come here and work for you, what is your definition of how I'm being successful? How do you handle deadlines? What are the ways that you're doing outreach? Like, it's a lot of asking those types of questions and seeing how they align with you, because I think we could sit here and say, oh, for instance, like mass design is very popular right now. And they're doing a lot of really incredible work. But you talk to people who are in the humanitarian space and they'll tell you it's very performative work, or yeah, it's great, but it's still nice architecture for rich folks, just they're rich folks in Africa. And so like, what does it mean even? I think that we've done too much in terms of like making the message sort of homogeneous. And it's exactly the same problem I have with academia, which is there's no one answer to that. Like, I have a lot of respect for HOK because they immediately sponsor H-1B visas, and they have never shied away from supporting, students who have come here, immigrated to this country to be architects. I hear a million architecture firm leaders complaining to me that they can't hire anybody, and you say, have you considered sponsoring H-1B visas? It's like, well, that's really expensive. Is it more expensive than you losing money on this project?
Yeah, so I guess, it seems like throughout kind of your advice is like very much a guidance on the individual and understanding that individual journey, either early career or, through kind of a self-discovery process. What do you love about working with students or young professionals? And I guess, can you give us some memorable stories that you've had where you've really felt your impact?
Yeah, I think that the legacy that I always set out to have for this was to be the person that I needed. And it sort of became, and that's why I think it's so personal, and why those individual connections are so important to me, because, you can have an impact on people in a lot of different ways. I have students who will come up to me years later and say, oh, I'm super glad that I had this opportunity, or employers who say, thanks so much for sending that person my way. They're really great. But yesterday I had somebody call me, and I pick up the phone, hello, and she's just going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I got out of an interview and they said 20 days of PTO, 20. Oh my God. Can you believe that? 20 days. That's like 4 weeks. What am I going to do with all that PTO? And was so excited, and it's so meaningful to me that he was the first person they think of to call and talk about it, or when they finally, there's nothing better than a student comes to me and says, this is my dream. My dream is to work for XYZ firm. It's to go and do this thing in the city or whatever. And they get it. Oh, I mean, I had a kid last year who said, I really want to work at OMA for the summer in Rotterdam. And I was like, okay, good luck with the application and the internship. I hope it works out for you. And he got in, and it was like, yeah, that's all he wanted. And I was so happy for him, because the joy, it's amazing to me. It's like, all you need to hear is that the answer is no if you don't ask. Like, you don't have that job right now. Whatever that dream job is of yours, you're not working there now. If you apply, your chances increase, right? And so just watching them realize what they were capable of, and it's like, and they're always so grateful. It's funny because people say kids these days, they don't appreciate anything. I've never had such gracious people in my life until I started working with students. And my answer is always the same. Like, you did it yourself. Your work, your interviews, yourself, all of the things that you have created for yourself are what opened these doors for you. That's incredible. And those stories are meaningful. The stories where a student's making enough money that they can send money home to support their family. The story where the student gets H-1B sponsorship and gets to stay in the United States. I mean, there are so many, and it's incredible. And I think in the same way that the story is so personal, the successes in that way are too. And it's an easy and wonderful place to be with people who work so hard and put so much of themselves into things, to just sit there and watch them take flight and be grateful to just witness it. And maybe that's corny, I don't know, but that's what drives me. Like, I'm even like, I sit here and look at you guys and I'm like, wow, you grew up and you're doing things and it's incredible. And I don't mean to patronize you in that way, but that's what it feels like. These are the stories, and that it doesn't have to be this like big thing. It doesn't have to be that you win the Pritzker Prize or that you do this or you do that meaningful big moment. It is, you have achieved however you define success. That's beautiful.
No, I think a lot of the advice and the things you've said have really kind of resonated with us. I think maybe we would have been set out on a better path had we had you as a career coach instead of a seminar teacher when we were at Rice. But I guess, for folks like who we were, who might not have the advantage of having someone like you to support them, to guide them through this journey, what would be, I guess, your one piece of advice for students who are graduating right now or thinking about their first step out into the real world?
My advice is to listen to the voice that's inside you. I think that's very important. We do a lot of, well, this is what I should do. This is where I should work. This is going to open some door. It's going to carve some path for me. And if I don't do this now, I'm never going to be able to do it. And there is a voice inside you that's saying, but that's not what I want. And if you hear that voice, listen to it. Life's too short and you can always change. I mean, we've had grad students who are in their 50s and 60s, There's always time. I've some of the most ridiculous things I've heard are, I'm 26 years old, I can't start over. It's like, come on, I know it feels that way right now, but for any of us, like, we're starting over all the time anyway. And that if you don't start to listen to and respect your own internal compass, you will just be lost, because everybody else has got opinions, right? Your parents have opinions about whether or not you should move home, and your partner has opinions about whether or not they're going to have a career option somewhere, and your friends have opinions about whether or not a place is cool enough or it sounds neat, or like, am I going to be able to, I don't want to go visit you in Omaha, Nebraska, like whatever it is. Everybody's biased about what they say, and understanding why and understanding those motivations. And it's not all bad, but people are always going to have expectations of you that they put on you, even if they don't mean to. And so the most important person to listen to is yourself. Those instincts are there for a reason. Those voices exist for a reason. You know yourself better than anyone.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the only person whose opinion matters is really your own in this regard.
It's true. And it feels bewildering when you're 24 years old and you're going into the world and you're going, I don't know what my inner voice is saying. I can't hear it. And I think that if you dial down the pressure on needing to figure out exactly what the answer is right away, it's, it'll serve you long term, because it's only a guess, and it's something that gives you skills and it gives you knowledge in some way. What's right, what's wrong, how to do it, how not to do it. Mm-hmm. What type of person to work for? I'll never work for that guy again, or I'm never going to be in a firm like this again. And those are valuable things, and you'll put together a puzzle from all of this over time. And it's okay if you don't have that on day one. That'd be ridiculous. They don't come out of the box all put together.
I think that's an epic piece of advice to kind of end on. But before we wrap, if our listener kind of wants to reach out to you or find you, where can they find you?
Oh boy, I'm on the worst social network there is. LinkedIn is the place to find me. For now anyway, as I continue my career journey, my own career journey, I'll be hopping around a few different places over the next few months. And so that's the one for me.
All right. Well, look out for updates from Jacki. Thank you, Jacki, for your story and your insights. And thank you, our listeners, for being with us on this episode of the Most Partner Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you are listening.